Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special Memorial Day edition of Richard French Live. I am Richard French, and today we will honor the people who died fighting for our country, but also the people who saved lives of others. First, a quick history lesson. Memorial Day, it was first recognized in 1868, just 3 years after the end of the Civil War. It was called Decoration Day, and just like today, it was a day to honor the fallen soldier. It got its name as people would decorate the graves with flowers and flags. Eventually, it was renamed Memorial Day, and in 1971, Congress established it, and it would be celebrated on the last Monday in every May. And it's been like that ever since. And on this last Monday in May, we will talk to Medal of Honor winner Clinton Ramisha, as well as his new book about his fight against the Taliban in Afghanistan. We'll also look at how a Westchester man just got honored by his town for the sacrifice he made for his country. And also, we will take you to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. That's where the bodies of our fallen heroes, they're reunited with their loved ones. But first, the story of a true American hero who received the highest honor bestowed by our military. Here is President Obama telling the story of Staff Sergeant Romeshay.
Now, to truly understand the extraordinary actions for which Clint is being honored, you need to understand the almost unbelievable conditions under which he and B Troop served. This was a time in 2009 when many of our troops still served in small, rugged outposts, even as our commanders were shifting their focus to larger towns and cities. So, Combat Outpost Keating was a collection of buildings of concrete and plywood with trenches and sandbags. Of all the outposts in Afghanistan, Keating was among the most remote. It sat at the bottom of a steep valley, surrounded by mountains, terrain that a later investigation said gave ideal cover for insurgents to attack. Cop Keating, the investigation found, was tactically indefensible. But that's what these soldiers were asked to do: defend the indefensible. The attack came in the morning, just as the sun rose. Some of our guys were standing guard. Most, like Clint, were still sleeping. The explosions shook them out of their beds and sent them rushing for their weapons. And soon the awful odds became clear. These 53 Americans were surrounded by more than 300 Taliban fighters. What happened next has been described as one of the most intense battles of the entire war in Afghanistan. The attackers had the advantage, the high ground, the mountains above, and they were unleashing everything they had: rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, mortars, snipers taking aim. To those Americans down below, the fire was coming in from every single direction. They'd never seen anything like it.
Against tremendous odds, Romeshay survived, and he saved the lives of his fellow soldiers. Staff Sergeant Romeshay, he wrote a powerful book about the battle and the experience. It is called Red Platoon. We recently sat down with him. You know, before we get into the book, why did you decide to join up in '99?
You know, for me, I came from a family of military history and tradition from my father being Vietnam, my grandfather World War II. Both my brothers had served. So it was always something I just wanted to kind of give back to this country.
Now, you were deployed twice to Iraq and once to Afghanistan, so certainly it wasn't your first rodeo when you got to Camp Keating. Give an idea to the folks just how remote of an outpost it was when you got there and what your first impressions were.
You know, Camp Keating was the farthest north coalition forces in Afghanistan at the time. The only way to access it was by helicopter. You couldn't drive there. Our next closest coalition forces, we were almost 30 kilometers away. And with it being so isolated and remote and sitting at the bottom of a valley, you know, you got one hot shower maybe once a week, a hot meal once every 3 to 4 days. You know, you're sleeping 3 to 4 feet away from your next battle buddy. But to be in that situation with those great men and just the character and magnitude of them, it didn't matter what the conditions were. You were there with your buddies, and life was always going to be good as long as you knew they were there for you.
And I guess the theory of it made sense, right? Even though you were at the bottom of a bowl, arguably, as we'll talk about in a second, almost target practice for the enemy. The idea was they wanted to set up camps that would kind of break up the easy passageways of the Taliban, and also that you could get embedded with a lot of the area, but that with the community of Afghans who were there, but that all kind of stopped once there was an IED attack against one of the commanders, I guess the year prior, right?
You know, our mission there was to help disrupt the movement of Taliban fighter and their supply lines coming through that area, to still engage with the local population to try and get them to step up and take control and influence their government and be more active with it.
You know, a lot of people at home, when they see this and they talk about your troop or your platoon, they think of these as these hardened special forces troops. But as you write in your book, a heroic bunch of guys, but a lot of them, they were kids, right? I mean, these weren't long-term military guys. For a lot of them, you know, they weren't that many years out of high school.
You know, they're first-time deployment for a lot of these kids, 18, 19, 20 years old. And you get every walk of life, you know, from rural communities to big cities. And that's what the military brings together. The average combat soldier, you know, is that. They're not Navy SEALs, they're not Army Rangers. Your average combat soldiers are what our platoon entailed. Now,
3 days before the attack, you guys were getting set to break the camp down, as I understand. And I saw a number here that you wrote about in the book. There was 40 attacks just in the last 5 months before that October 3rd morning. Give an idea, before we even get to that day, what it was like on a regular basis. It seems that you guys must have been under you know, intense pressure on a minute-by-minute basis, let alone day by day.
You know, it was one of those situations that, because of the area we set in, yeah, you'd get attacked 3 to 4 times a week on average. But it also allowed us to hone our skills and to understand how to adjust our plan of attack down there at the base. So when October 3rd did happen, you know, we had a good sense of reaction and response to that.
Right before 6 in the morning, the attack happens, and the Taliban decided to throw everything they had at you guys, 300 of their fighters. Describe what the next 13 hours were like.
You know, it was a morning and a day that was never be forgotten, and the mindset of just do your job, because you know you had the guys to your left and right doing theirs, and to know if the situations were different. If I was up at the Humvee where Sergeant Gallegos was, he was going to come get me, so I had to do the same for him, and that was the motivation that day.
You lost 8 guys, more than 27 were wounded. You were torn up yourself that day. I know when you received the Medal of Honor, the President said that among the things that we learned was we were never going to put our troops in a position where they had to defend the indefensible. How are you doing today, and what do you want people to think about on Memorial Day instead of just the barbecues? How's it been since you left the military a few years back?
You know, making the transition out and going into civilian world is always a scary time for military. My process had gone fairly smooth. But in doing the book Red Platoon, showing to light, you know, so many Americans of what that service and sacrifice is, really is, you know, kind of a testament to our men and women.
Clinton, I appreciate it so much. Staff Sergeant, thank you not just for your time, but for your service.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you.
Up next, a local man who died a hero, being remembered and honored by having a bridge in Westchester named after him. We'll tell you his story.